That's all I'm going to say about the phylogeny of the plants. What I'd like to do now is turn our attention to the structure of a plant and talk just a little bit about how plants work. Plants need a few things in order to survive and reproduce. They need a source of energy, sunlight. They need carbon in the form of CO2. They also have to take up water and nutrients. There are basically three systems within any plant. The shoot system takes care of collecting light energy and CO2. The root system gets a hold of water and nutrients, and because these two systems are separated spatially, you have to have vascular tissue that moves photosynthate down from the shoots to feed the roots, and you have to have vascular tissue to move water and nutrients up from the roots to the cells that are higher up in the plant. Plants have a different body form than ours. We are what are called unitary organisms. Although there can be certain shape changes within the lifetime of an animal, most animals start off looking like a small version of what they will later become. That is, the shape doesn't change very much, it just grows in size. In plants, on the other hand, the way that you grow is not for the entire structure to change in size so much as it is to add new elements. It is as though if you were to grow by adding on more and more arms and maybe stretching upward, rather than becoming a larger and larger version of your baby self. In addition to adding on new modular parts when they grow, plants have what's called indeterminate growth, and that means that there is no fixed endpoint. They'll just keep growing until they die. This is true of some animals, but most animals have what's called determinate growth. Human beings do, for example. We grow until we reach a certain size, and then we stop growing. You can see the implications of both modular growth and indeterminate growth in the forms of some plants. Many plants simply grow by kind of reaching out to one side and forming a new plant on that branch that has reached out to the side. If you've ever had a spider plant, you're familiar with this phenomenon. The way that spider plants typically reproduce is they reach out a long, thin stalk, at the end of which grows a tiny little spider plant. When that plant touches the soil, it can detach from the mother plant and become a separate individual. There's a certain amount of vocabulary that you ought to know about plant anatomy. Below ground, there may be what's called a taproot, a root that goes straight down. There are basically always lateral roots, which are roots that go out to the side. A stem is the fundamental structure that you see above ground. Stems can go straight up or they can go sideways. The stems generally bear leaves, although they may have a lot of other functions as well. When you have leaves growing off of a stem like this, they split that stem up into what are called internodes. So the space between two pairs of leaves is called an internode. The location where you have leaves coming off the stem, one or more leaves coming off the stem, is called a node. The places where a plant can grow are what are called meristematic tissue. I'll get to what that is in a minute. But there are root tips where growth can occur. There are what is called an apical bud, where growth can occur. A plant can add on a new stem up here at the tip. It can also add on flower structures. But there are also generally what are called lateral buds that can grow new stems out sideways. You start with the root system of a plant. Plants can be a little bit like icebergs, although we don't generally appreciate it. As much as 4/5 of a plant's mass may be underground. Because the underground environment is less prone to freezing, there are a lot of plants that will die back during the winter. Some plants in dry environments will die back during the summer. What's happening when that occurs is that the above ground parts of the plant cease to function. The plant basically withdraws nutrients from them and allows them to die. But many of these plants will continue living underground. They're just biding their time until the conditions get right for photosynthesis again, and then they send out new above ground parts year after year. Leaves consist of a couple of different parts generally. The leaf blade is the area that's available for photosynthesis. It's held away from the stem by what's called a petiole. Leaves can come in a tremendous variety of shapes. These over here on the left are what are called compound leaves, and I'm not going to get into that. But it can be difficult to recognize even these basic parts on certain leaves. At the cellular level, one thing that you have to remember when you think about how plants grow is that they have cell walls. Once the cell wall is set down, the shape and size of the cell are pretty much fixed. You also can't have cells moving around the way that you can in, say, animal bodies. There are 3 plant tissue systems that you ought to know about, or sorry, 4 plant tissue systems that you ought to know about. One of them is meristematic tissue. This is undifferentiated tissue, kind of like human stem cells. It has not yet taken on a specific role or identity in a plant. Then there are 3 kinds of differentiated tissue. One of them is dermal tissue. This is the outer layer of tissue on a plant, a very thin outer layer that does things like secretes the waxy cuticle, or it may grow lignin to protect the plant as well as to provide structural strength. Here again is the cuticle, that waxy layer on the outside of a leaf. Again, the role of that is mostly to inhibit water loss, and that is made by dermal tissue. Another very important element of dermal tissue are the stomata and the cells that open and close them. This is a very clever mechanism. The guard cells are held open essentially by their own internal water pressure called turgor pressure. When they are inflated with water, they take on this curved bean-like shape, and the stomata open. When the plant starts losing water, however, water moves by osmosis out of these cells as well as out of the other cells in a plant. And as the cell gets flabbier and flabbier, its form collapses in on the stomata, causing it to close. So there's this automatic mechanism that closes stomata when a plant is losing a lot of water, and that prevents dehydration from getting too extreme. The dermal layer is also responsible for making some other structures. What you're seeing here are structures called trichomes. They can serve a lot of different functions. Often they are a physical barrier to small animals like insects that might try to eat a plant. Sometimes they reflect sunlight, which might seem a strange thing for a plant to do, but it is possible for plants to get more sunlight than they can use, and sunlight causes them dehydration, as well as potentially burning them with ultraviolet rays. The second differentiated tissue system that you should know is what's called ground tissue. Most of the tissue of a plant is ground tissue. I'm not going to say too much about it. It's kind of a grab bag of different things, but this is where photosynthesis takes place. It's also the site of most of the other things that a plant does, such as generate hormones. It's where pigments are made, and this is where defensive chemical compounds get produced. Finally, there's what's called vascular tissue. And again, this is the tissue that's responsible for moving fluids from one place to another within the plant. And there are 2 kinds of vascular tissue that you need to know about. One is called xylem. Xylem is the elevator that goes up. It takes water and nutrients from the roots and delivers them to the shoots. Phloem is the other kind of vascular element. Phloem are the tubes that take sugars and amino acids down to the basement. So xylem transports the water and nutrients up. Phloem transports water and sugar down within a plant. These are what some of the phloem tubes look like in the angiosperms. I mentioned before that there are some cells that are these completely hollow structures. The cell has become basically devoid of internal content, and that's what allows water to flow through these vessel elements so rapidly. This sieve tube member is completely empty here. Its cellular needs are actually taken care of by this companion cell, which grows right next to it. It retains its nucleus, which the sieve tube member does not, and so it can carry out all the normal functions of a cell, both for itself and for its neighbor.